Do you have a tricycle?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Can you ride it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. But one time I fell off a blue bike that of mine. But then it really hurt.
You ride your trike fast?
No.
No?
Then you fell off.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, how do you ride it? What do you do?
You do it like that.
Among the creatures on our planet, human beings stand out for a number of reasons. They stand out because they stand up. They stand out because of the size and complexity of their brain. But they also stand out in a less obvious way. They take a long, long time to grow up. Other animals have a period of childhood, but none as extended as ours. Humans remain children almost twice as long as our closest living relatives, the great apes. The timing mechanisms in the body that create our lengthy childhood are part of what we call the biological clock. This clock is responsible for scheduling our physical development, and in this program we're going to learn more about its history. Over the ages, it has found that an extended childhood brings advantages as great as walking upright and having a large brain. The program begins with an unseen and puzzling event triggered by the biological clock. The event creates a detour on the road to sexual maturity. It gives children time to develop, time to pretend, and time to learn how to. One of the ways the biological clock builds a human body is by secreting chemical messengers known as hormones. The messengers are released at designated times throughout much of life. Many travel through the bloodstream to distant sites to do their work. Dr. Inez Baetens studies hormones in children.
Well, a hormone is a substance that is made by a gland that enters the circulation and travels to a distant gland where it has an effect, where it elicits an action. That is the classical definition of a hormone.
The hormones that construct a person's reproductive system are known as sex hormones. Their work starts early in life, before birth in fact. By the end of the 3rd month after conception, the human fetus has sex organs and is producing sex hormones, mainly testosterone in males and estrogen in females. At birth, these hormones are present in a baby's bloodstream at very high levels.
What we now know is that when babies are born, in the first few months of life, they have hormone circulating levels that are equivalent to pubertal levels. Little boys will make as much testosterone as an adult man.
You don't know the effects of this.
No, we don't.
But you know if you take a blood sample.
If we take a blood sample, it's there. And it must be there for a purpose and a reason. It's just that we don't know what it is.
And this high level continues till about when?
Oh, about 18 months to 2 years. It's quite a long time.
Just as puzzling as the presence of sex hormones in the infant is an event that takes place before the age of 2. The hormones virtually disappear.
What causes that? And then what causes them to resume rising and starting to pulsate as an initiation of puberty is totally unknown. No one knows that.
We don't know what biological switches turn the sex hormones down in infancy and turn them up again at puberty. It's as though the biological clock is heading straight for sexual maturity and then, to everyone's surprise, takes a detour, a long, long detour to the land of childhood. We know the detour gives the brain and the body time to develop, but compared with that of other animals, the human detour is extraordinarily long. Professor Barry Bogan, an anthropologist, offers an explanation.
People are dependent on learned behavior. Now, many other animals learn, but people are actually dependent on complex learned behavior for our very survival. The standard explanation for why we have such a long childhood and why we delay reproduction is we have so much to learn.
Professor Stephen Jay Gould concurs.
So the argument has been that the main function of this enormously slowed development is to provide for an animal with this unique cognitive capacity of ours the extended period of childhood that makes for learning, that allows the development of the intelligence that's implicit in our brains.
But there is another and perhaps equally valid argument. Professor Bogan.
one important job of all children is babysitting, taking care of younger children. We see this in hunting and gathering societies like the Kung of Southern Africa and the Arunta of Australia, and I've seen it in Guatemala City with urban poor. The prime job of children is taking care of younger children and doing odd jobs around the house. Not so in chimpanzees, gorillas, blue whales, or elephants. The mother must do all of this, and that places a limit on reproduction.
According to the second argument, babysitting conferred such an advantage to humans that our biological clock evolved to keep children children as long as possible. Turn the sex hormones down by the age of 2. Don't turn them up again until you absolutely must.
Evolutionary changes get coded into any part of our body, including the clock, because they confer some advantage to the individuals that possess them. So if adults could be off gathering and hunting while their children were back in some sort of home camp or home base, in a play group, a babysitting group, the original daycare centers 1 million years ago may have been these groups of children of different ages playing back at some protected home base with maybe an older male or female around just to watch over them to make sure nothing too terrible happened. That still happens today in groups around the world. If our ancestors were able to develop that, they would have had the reproductive advantage and also the food gathering advantage. And those would have been selected for, that is, they would have been encoded into our biology.
No less than our skulls and our skeletons, the biological clock evolved to make us what we are. It now appears that because of the benefits of learning and babysitting, it extended the period of childhood. It chose the way of the tortoise, not of the hare.
What's that?
L. A. R. A.
Lara. You can draw your name. That's good. Good, good.
About Laura. That's my name.
Lara is almost 4 and well into the extended period of childhood. She's been walking and talking for nearly 3 years. She can write her name, though her letters take a lot of imagination to make out. She can ride a tricycle. And, of course, she gets regular checkups from her doctor.
You go to my doctor because it's called Dr. Weinblatt.
And this is her pediatrician, Dr. Howard Weinblatt.
Going from being able to sit up to being able to walk requires an increase in muscle tone in the trunk, and also that stability needs to go down into the legs. That's all part of a general concept in human development that says that development starts out at the top of the head and gradually works its way down to the feet.
It's the down and out principle. While the biological clock is holding off the maturation of the reproductive system, it's bringing the brain and body online, and in that order. Physical development works its way down from the head and out to the extremities. Babies lift their heads before they sit. They sit before they stand. And if you watch the way kids learn to throw a ball, you'll see another example of the down and out principle. Younger children throw with their arms. Older children add wrist, hand, and fingers. Dr. Weinblatt has a simple way of demonstrating how long it takes for the fingers to become fine-tuned.
For instance, at 3 years of age, we'll ask some children to do a maneuver where they touch their thumb and their finger together, and then follow that by touching their thumb and their long finger, and then their thumb and their ring finger, and then their thumb and their little finger. Well, they can do their thumb and their first finger very early, when they're 9 months to a year of age. Thumb and second finger, they can usually do somewhere between 2 and 3 it'll really be 5 in some kids before they can really get that thumb to all of their fingers.
Look what I can do with my fingers. Okay. Can you do this?
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, you can touch your big finger. Can you touch the next finger? Try it. So, is that a little harder?
Yeah.
This-
I can do that finger to that finger. I could do that finger to that and that finger to that.
Good. Can you do this finger?
This is difficult.
Okay. Can you do your little pinky? Lara cannot yet get her thumb to her last 2 fingers, but even now her control is precise enough for some preschool skills. Dr. Weinblatt.
The child's able to pick up a crayon and scribble on a piece of paper. And if the parents make those writing tools available to the child's well on his way to starting to write.
In the same way that development works its way down the arms and out to the fingers, it travels down the legs and out to the toes.
Did you, Piggy, go to the market? Did you, Piggy, had stayed home? Did you, Piggy, had Ruby? Did you, Piggy, didn't? Did you, Piggy, went all the way home?
We see if kids can walk on their tiptoes at the age of 3. This lets us know that the nervous system from their spine down is intact. And it also lets us know that their muscle tone and strength is intact in their lower limbs.
At some point, children put hands and feet together and try to tie a shoe. It isn't easy. Lara can't do it yet, but she'll try to tell you how. How do you do it?
Well, you do this under that, and you put this in here.
Okay, how's this?
Good.
Now what do I do?
Now you put it in here, and then put that in there, and then do it under there, okay?
Okay, how'd I do?
It's very hard. My mommy can do it easy.
Tying a shoe requires not only a fair degree of fine motor coordination, the other thing that it takes is being able to remember a set of directions that require spatial orientation. It's one thing to remember a set of verbal directions, and it's another thing to be able to picture those shoelaces in your mind, picture what they look like when you make them into a bow, picture that bow moving around through space, under and over and coming out. You really have to be able to do all of that in your mind before you can do it easily and repetitively with your fingers.
And you may have to wait until you're 5 or 6 to do it. Like Jordan.
I twisted it, I put it through, and then I make one loop. I flip the other one across the loop, and then I make another loop and push it down. If I want to make a double knot, I spread it out so not too far, and then I do the same thing what I did starting out, crossing it and putting it through.
Once physical development has completed its path down from the head and out to the fingers and toes, it goes one step further. At this point, children become interested in activities that require them to balance their bodies in space.
Roller skating, skateboarding, riding a two-wheel bike are all skills that require developing control of your body without a stable base. And again, that's a skill that kids tend to get somewhere between the ages of 5 and 7 or 8. Some very talented children be able to develop those skills as early as 3 or 4. Some other kids maybe not until 9 or 10. But the key factor about all of those skills is that being able to keep your center of gravity over a narrow point.
Gaining this ability to balance is marked by one of childhood's greatest accomplishments, remembered by people of all ages.
Yes, there's a very vivid picture in my mind, and I remember it was a little red bike, and it was in the morning and the sun was shining, and it was right in front of our house, and my father came out with me, and he was going to teach me how to ride without training wheels.
And I said, Dad, can I try in the parking lot? And he said it's easier to ride on the grass. And I said, well, Dad, can I just try once? And he said, okay.
So I got on the bike and I started pedaling, and she pushed me.
And was running behind me while I was pedaling, and he was holding on the back, and then he just let go, and I just kept pedaling.
And then I turned around and he wasn't there because he had stopped pushing me. And I went, Dad.
And the force of gravity carrying me down the hill, and I remember trying to steer around trees and maintain my balance.
I didn't take into account that there was a huge sand pit just a few feet below where the grassy slope was, and it took me no time at all to reach the sand pit.
And my hands just wouldn't move for some reason. I mean, it was like they were just permanently stuck there.
And I must have gone, I don't know, a good 10, 15 feet before I fell.
I didn't get hurt, though.
As well as being a time for growth of brain and body, childhood is a time for how-to, a time to learn the skills possessed by the adults in your culture. That seems to be a prime reason why the biological clock delays sexual maturity. And one of the ways children first practice adult skills is by playing pretend.
Let's pretend I was ready.
Dinner's ready.
Okay. Let's pretend it's with a bowl.
Okay. There's a bowl for you. Is there a bowl for me?
Let's pretend it's with a bowl. Yeah.
Okay, that's for me. There's a fork for me. Okay, thanks. Well, let's eat the spaghetti. See how this tastes.
We put yummy stuff on it, right?
Yeah, well, this is yummy. Oh, that's good. Uh-oh.
What?
I'm getting a tummy ache.
When you're almost 4, you can be a pretend mom who cooks a pretend meal. Or you can be a pretend entertainer.
Cause I'm a winky ginky gink, and I'm a winky doo. I love you. I love you in the morning and in the afternoon. I love you in the evening and underneath the moon. Oh, can I'm a winky ginky gink, can I'm a winky doo. I love you, boo boo boo.
At 5, you can run a pretend store.
You know, my friend Molly has pretend money.
Yeah.
She pretends just to make up a little thing and calls it the party store.
Who goes to the party store?
My friend Molly, but it's not real. Not a real party store.
Who owns the store? Is it you or Molly?
No one really, because it's just really outside.
Oh.
And when you're 7, you can push the buttons on a pretend spaceship.
I think if you push H1, it's health 1. It will just give you basics. And it will tell you what to do in these, whatever happens. Like if this thing came, it would tell you fire front lasers or fire back lasers. This is like you just watch to see if we're gonna go for any time tunnels. Right now, I think we are. Because these two things light off red.
Somewhere between 5 and 7, children begin to understand games with rules, and that opens the door to a whole new set of physical skills. You can learn how to hit a baseball.
Well, just keep your eye on the ball. You shouldn't watch the ball all the way in. I mean, you shouldn't watch it. You should just kind of wait till it's about, a foot away from you, and then swing, and usually you'll get it.
Or how to stop a soccer ball.
My friend, he's a good goalie. Brian,
he tells me to look at the guy, and where he shoots it, you go. But I don't do that. I just wait until the ball and somehow block it, somehow just get it out. And if you can, knock it over, just get it out of there. It's like if he gets it in, you're dead.
Dr. Weinblatt.
And one of the most important things in the life of the older child, the child from 6 or 7 on up to puberty, is that those are the years when the child develops skills that he'll need for the rest of his life. One of the blessed things about being that age is there is no cost in being a beginner. All kids that age are beginners. And if they do it wrong, if they make a mistake, they don't pay a price for it.
Much of later childhood is how-to time. Children practice and perfect newfound physical skills. Before the sex hormones return at puberty, children will ideally develop what psychoanalyst Erik Erikson called a sense of industry, a sense of being useful and competent that comes from knowing how to.
9 or 10-year-olds are really only limited by their lack of practice and experience and technical knowledge of skills, and by the fact that they don't have the muscle strength and muscle bulk that they'll get at puberty.
But puberty will come in its own good time, and so will the accomplishments of how-to time.
There are so many factors that go into motor development that whether a kid does any particular task at a given age really isn't very important. What's important is, first of all, that the child's making progress, that he's developing, that he is gaining new skills every day, that today he is doing things that he couldn't do last week. And if it's a little bit behind or a little bit ahead, that's unlikely going to make a great difference by the time the children reach puberty.
Well, I remember the guy, he kicked it to the goalie so the goalie could punt it. He kicked it to the goalie, it hit off the post. I slid in, I kicked it, and it just went whoosh right on the other side of the goal, and it was a goal.
What did you feel like then?
I felt like I was praying. I was saying, thank you, God.
Like if you hit a home run, do you say, thank you, God?
No, I just run.
Eventually, the sex hormones that vanished in infancy return. The detour of childhood yields to the biological necessity of reproduction. For mammals other than humans, when sexual maturity comes, the time for learning is over. Professor Gould.
You know, most mammals, once they become sexually mature, are essentially finished with whatever learning they're going to do. Juvenile mammals play, adult mammals don't. Sexual maturity in most creatures, not so much in humans, is essentially the end of any flexibility in behavior. All those experiments that attempt to teach language to chimps, with juvenile chimps, the minute they hit sexual maturity, you can't do anything with them.
The situation is different for humans who are capable of learning throughout life, and yet we do carry a legacy from the past. Professors Bogan and Gould.
We know that children will learn more readily than feisty adolescents and young adults. There seems to be something that holds back the willingness to learn from adults when those sex hormones start pouring through our bloodstream and other parts of our body. So children are, let's say, primed to learn.
We're learning creatures. It's only recently that we learned to write things down. I imagine that older societies in the past relied upon older people with experience, with wisdom, people who knew more of the history of the group.
Maybe I can just give you one anecdote of how important learning is for human survival. The Australian Aborigines, until very recently, lived by hunting and gathering. They grew no food of their own. They did not live in settled villages. One of the most critical things for them was water. During the long dry season in the central Australian desert, water was very scarce. people learned songs. And in the songs, there was information about where to find food and water. In one very bad year, there was a terrible drought in Australia. And people, the Australian Aborigines, were dying of thirst. One old man was able to keep his small band of 20 or so people alive by remembering stories and remembering songs about water holes that he had learned in his childhood. He took his band on a trek across the desert for over 200 kilometers to a water hole that he had never seen, but he knew from song. That water hole was there, they found it, they survived. That's the power of learning.
And learning is so powerful that over the ages it appears to have shaped the biological clock. That clock now programs a long period of life before reproduction begins, a time for children to learn. It also programs a long period of life after most reproduction ends, a time for elders to pass learning on. In the second year of life, the clock halts maturation of the reproductive system. It gives the brain and body time to develop, starting with the head, ending with the fingers and toes. It gives children time to pretend, time to play, time to learn how to. Learning may be the greatest gift. When the sex hormones shut down at the end of the second year of life, children are primed to learn. Years from now, you'll forget these words I'm saying, but you won't forget that first bike ride during how-to time.
I remember not having any, problem stopping or anything like that. I just remembered going around the block and that it looked entirely different than it had ever looked before. It was like this big, wide world was out there, and I was loose in it. Yeah, it was exhilarating.